Welcome to the first episode of this new podcast that is discussing everything you've ever wanted to know about craft beer. I'm Susan Boyle, your host, and I'm delighted to be joined by a selection of Ireland's best craft brewers to dive into the business of craft brewing in Ireland. For this episode, we have Seamus O'Hara from Carlow Brewing, Tom Cronin from Rye River Brewing Company, Áine O'Hara from Connemara Brewing, and Liam Tutty from Dead Centre Brewing, and more recently, beercloud.ie. You're all very welcome to the episode. I'm delighted to have you here. So our theme for today that we're talking to all of you about is really about like kind of the business of craft brewing in Ireland. And also we've been through extraordinary times. We're not over extraordinary times. We're still going through extraordinary times. So I suppose a little focus on what you guys have all been up to for the last couple of years. Áine, you have been on a huge adventure.
Yeah, roller coaster adventure. Yeah. We started Connemara Brewing 3 years ago, but by the time we got the brewery back up to spec and we did our first brew, I will never forget it. The week Leo went out in front of the building and said, and now we're going to close. And we were there looking, going, oh no, what are we going to do?
Because all the work that goes into getting to the point of getting your first brew done is a huge journey. Yeah. And then for this period of uncertainty to just kick off, this small thing that seemed like a cold that some people were having over in Asia, and then it's on your doorstep.
Yeah, and like we didn't expect it to be so much so fast either. And like, we're Connemara Brewing, we're in a great region. We wanted to focus kind of on getting tourists and locals involved. So our plan was, let's get the brewery where we need it, get started and get into the pubs.
And then the pubs closed their doors.
And all the pubs closed their doors. Like our first plan was it's all going to be keg because we had complete control in the brewery of brewing to kegging.
Brilliant.
Because we had no other packaging avenues at that time. So it was like, okay, let's have a quick meeting and see how we diversify here and get on with it.
Wow.
So,
and I think also that, I suppose that business strategy of getting pints into the hands of punters so that they can really taste what it is rather than having to mediate that through like on a shelf and do it differently. It's definitely, I can see how starting off, that's a great way, unless the place that you want to do that in is closed.
Yeah, well, I like that idea because I felt like, I've a lot of control over it. I know when you can get to know your publicans, and as you said, you put a physical pint into people's hands and it's a bit more, physical, and you can see the punter enjoying it out and about. So as I said, that was our number one go-to to start with, 100% kegs.
So this is interesting because we have someone who is a publican in the room. So Liam from Dead Centre.
I never described myself as a publican.
I know well. What I mean is maybe the use of a publican's licence.
Yeah, well, we can absolutely relate. Like anyone who has seen our brewery, it's tiny. The entire intent of the brewery in the pub was to brew for keg, was to brew for our own bar, and work a very American taproom model.
Amazing.
So the brewery is small but perfectly formed for what we wanted it to do, which was fill kegs, sell beer at the bar, bring the kegs back in, wash them, refill them.
Perfect. And ideal. So close as well. Like,
it's brilliant.
Why put in those difficulties of having to add transport and logistics when, you can sell on site?
And it just adds to the price. Unfortunately, you have to charge at the end of it, which obviously is a concern at the moment because that's in free rise. But again, we built a brewery specifically to fill kegs at a time when we opened the doors in the pub in February 2019. The brewery is in the pub, but the brewery didn't get signed off. We weren't able to operate until November, and then in March the country closes down. It was a harsh blow.
Yeah, but you reacted to that.
Yeah, well, we had always.
I suppose no one has a choice. We all have to react to things when it comes our way.
We'd always produced cans, so we had cans in market already. That we were having contract brewed, and all our canned volume is still not brewed in the pub. It's just that the volume wouldn't be possible in the pub. So the cans started to do quite well. We secured some really good distribution partners in the west and in the east, and things went quite well that way. And then obviously we launched BeerCloud as well, which was kind of just a knee-jerk reaction, to be honest with you. But look, it kept us busy. It kept people in jobs, which was a huge concern for me. People left very good jobs to join Dead Centre, and then the world went upside down.
Yeah.
So.
I also think it's interesting because I talked to you early on in the beer cloud journey. And what was really nice was on the ground, I was hearing from other craft brewers. They were talking about how brilliant it was to have someone who knew the industry, who had found a solution to that distribution aspect of getting the cans and the bottles that were being produced by people into punters' hands when the other avenues were closed. And also that there was a general feeling that it increased people's opportunity to try new things. Because if you're filling a box of delicious beers and you're like, well, I'm used to this one, but maybe I'll try something else. And your ability to connect with other craft brewers to do that, because you had those connections in the industry anyway, seemed really beneficial.
Yeah, and to be fair, we made a lot more. Like we stocked Connemara, having never met any of the guys in Connemara because the timing was that kind of a way. But no, it worked really well. It kept people busy, and my main thing is keeping people employed. If I can keep giving people checks, I'm happy. So that helped a lot of people during COVID. So that even aside from the brewers, which is obviously important, to keep the guys employed was a big win.
Well, then I suppose talking to the other people who are around our lovely table today, that kind of aspect, I'd love to throw it out to you, Tom, as well. That idea of getting beer to people, finding another way, because your brand in Rye River have done that very successfully, to kind of break out from the idea that I think sometimes this feeling that the taps on people's bars that we're familiar with are the same offerings a lot of the time. So it's really interesting to see, well, what are the other ways of getting people to try these beers that are being brewed that are really interesting?
Yeah, I suppose I've come from the drinks industry, so I've had the experience of bigger brand beers in Heineken and Molson Coors. 9 years now, living the craft dream, and very fortunate to have come on a brilliant journey that has had serious lows and serious highs, and that's well documented. Our strategy has always been to make an everyday craft beer that's credible, that has massive consistency, and that oozes with as much quality as we can put into the craft, and get it into the hands of major retailers and build that relationship. And that's been, I suppose, our preferred route to market. 90% of our beer is done in retail. 10% is on premise, on trade. That's a very challenging market for any of us around the room, no matter how big or new your brand is, competing on tap in the environment that we're in, where the big guys are going after market share very aggressively. But that's the nature of where we play, and that's why possibly Rye River is 90% retail, 10% on trade. We also availed of Liam's service in lockdown in Beer Cloud, and what a brilliant pivot, But we were less reliant because we had our brands on shelf at the time, McGargles, Solus Grafters and Crafty Brewing Company. And we can all look back, and I remember in March when COVID hit, our world fell apart like most other people. And to Liam's point, my core job was to keep people gainfully employed. We had delivery guys, we do some direct to customer. We have guys that only service the on-premise. Their role is sales. I'm sure Seamus is the same. And our goal was, okay, what can we do to keep these people gainfully employed? And we managed to do that by pivoting. So some of them back into retail to service that channels. Others came into the brewery. Unfortunately, as COVID came and moved on, we all realised that retail had a real relevance and online had a real relevance, and it definitely allowed us survive and get out there, and grow market share for the category. Let's not forget that,
So I think that's really important, because it's still, the craft sector is still such a small sector of the overall beer sector. So when we find a way of getting just these delicious beers into people's hands, however that happens, and not to be trying to look for the silver lining in a pandemic, because that's ridiculous, but it does offer a huge shift and a shift in the way people are thinking. So I think people became more aware that how important something is that's local, and that it does have a knock-on effect on the actual jobs of the people who are in the community and in the area.
Yeah, we definitely saw that, and we were only starting out, and to keep going was so as you said there, Tom, pivot was exactly what we all had to do, I think, so we went straight to can. But like that, I think looking for silver linings in COVID is what kept me going, at least in the business going. And that is that local went back to sourcing locally. And I think you can see that a lot in what beer drinkers are drinking nowadays. And like, you know, our flagship brand would be a lager.
Yeah.
A few years ago it would be like, oh, why is craft beer lager? You know, it wasn't popular. Whereas now they're like, oh, if I can shift away from a foreign lager,
well, I think
I'll
this
go
is
for something local.
Thinking about Seamus, who is also here, and the choice of O'Hara's beers and talking about classic styles of beers and the huge success of O'Hara's Stout. I love when I can go other places and I can get your stout in another country. I just get such a buzz out of it.
Yeah, me too.
I'm like, give me more of that, please.
I know what it's taken to get it there.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
And so that aspect, like I suppose the export market as well, in relation to how that was affected during it. What were your insights in relation to that?
Yeah, I suppose, like, you know, we had similar experience to the other guys in the domestic market, and we would have had quite a focus on trade, but luckily we had also had good coverage in retail. So that did, you know, after initially kind of not knowing what was going to happen, you know, the retail kind of ramped up, and we, you know, then had a lot of pressure on our bottling line, but we were in the middle of making a decision to put in a canning line as well, just at the start of COVID, and we kind of scratched our heads a bit about it, but we decided to stay going on it.
Brilliant.
And you know, that came on stream sort of, it was early 2021, I guess, when that, you know, was kind of up and running. But that was kind of good timing as well. It gave us, you know, capacity for packaged beer, I suppose, when the demand was shooting up, because I suppose we saw the same thing to a large extent on the export markets. You know, different distributors that we have abroad, I suppose, adopted differently, but they were all adopting to the loss of their, you know, on-trade. And you know, in some markets we were probably mostly doing on-trade.
Yeah.
But it sort of led to a bit of an acceleration of, because, you know, when you go out to export markets, an unknown brand can't suddenly go into a retail chain or something, because
they won't have any traction on the
so
shelves.
often you kind of lead with on-trade and try and, you know, develop some presence for your brand. But I think we saw probably some acceleration of moving our products into retail or into off-trade opportunities. And, you know, so that kind of, again, I suppose we, you know, in pretty much all our export markets, you know, after an initial dip, we saw them all kind of building back up. Most of our customers, you know, found a way to stay going, and, you know, we were kind of part of it.
Good.
And like I said, you know, the fact that we were able to, you know, we had actually, you know, we were putting in, and then we had increased packaging capacity for bottle and can. That would just turn out to be good timing. So it, like, you know, kept you know, because I had the same worry about, you know, we have, you know, we kind of look at, you know, in terms of we, you know, do our own sales, our own deliveries, you know, a lot, like I say, a lot to on-trade. So we were always concerned about everybody's jobs and how we would handle that. But, you know, we kind of shifted people that were on-trade into retail, and then, like, you know, demand between domestic and export kind of bounced back. So
it's also worth noting how incredibly significant it was for the Irish craft beer market that this happened. That everything turned over in March of all months. Like, if it had happened in January, you know,
that was a big problem for export, because literally, okay, domestic I think closed just before St. Patrick's, was a problem, but like for Irish food or beverage companies in export, St. Patrick's is huge as well.
6 weeks before that, 12 weeks before that. You're planning for so long.
But a lot of us had product shipped, if you like, for events and things, you know, in different countries, and, you know, a lot of that basically didn't happen. So it was a bit of the timing was terrible.
Even domestically, Susan, I think, you know, when we all pivoted and we all survived, and I think we can look back and go that we were one of the more fortunate industries within COVID. You know, call a spade, market share grew for craft, more people engaged, more people bought beer through platforms like Liam's, more people bought beer off our shelves, but the other side of it is we had a lot of product ready for market in on-premise.
Yeah.
And as Seamus said, in export, that had to be decanted, that no support came from. And I'm very grateful for what the government did for, you know, what they could within the industry. But we were deemed essential service. And I think that we harboured an awful lot of costs through COVID. What kept us going was growing market share and growing sales. You know, and that's why I think today at 2:00 I'm going to take the opportunity, or 1:00. I think the government need to really look at the current climate and not forget the essential service providers like ourselves, because while it's great to give, and I'm pivoting here a little, while it's great to give, and I absolutely welcome it, anything that can be done for hard-pressed individuals, if you don't keep SMEs in business, there is no gainful employment, and the crisis gets a lot worse. So while COVID was, in hindsight, we survived and we did well and market share grew. It's certainly been a curveball since, and I think a bigger curveball in the last 12 months. Now it's a case of the government stepping back in and not forgetting the SMEs,
Yeah, because I think there's a feeling that like, oh, well, sure, aren't we over that thing that made us all sick and won't it all go back to normal? But I think there's been just a seismic shift in it. And I would hope that there'd be a re-understanding of how important SMEs are, because you're all small businesses, you're all based in your communities. And it's been fascinating to hear all of you talk about the primary concern being, how am I going to keep this business going for the people whose livelihoods depend on it? And that's much more than we think of this industry, and often we think of the fun side of it, sharing great drinks and having great moments with brilliant people. But actually what's really nice in this environment here, to be able to dig down and have these conversations with you about, actually it's that, but it's also so much more than that. It's about lives and communities and jobs and people on the ground and giving, also growing this industry that like, to have someone like Seamus here in the room who was at the beginning of going, oh, look, this is a great thing. We need to be doing more of that here, and Áine, with your international experience as well, that, to see that happening at home is a wonderful thing, because there's so many rich beer cultures in other parts of the world and we have a reputation internationally for having a very rich beer culture. But seeing it on the ground is something that is still a work in progress, I suppose.
It continues work in progress, and I think now our challenge is, how do we grow the category again? Because I'm sure we'll discuss it today, but MUP, which should provide assistance in time, has certainly sent shockwaves. Retail is down 28% in beer this year. Craft beer is down 25%. 71% of beer sold in retail is from 10 breweries, and that's not just O'Hara's and ourselves that are fortunate enough to be in that mix, but other international breweries. So it's a very challenging place to be, but our goal is to grow market share. The US is heading towards a 20% market share in the next 2 or 3 years. There seems to be a resurgence back in craft beer. I mean, Seamus is around 25, 26 years at this and has seen it all. I'm 9 years and I've seen a lot more than I ever hoped for.
It's been a lot of change.
But we're probably stagnated around 3.2% market share. And you have to question, is that enough market share domestically to sustain all the jobs that we all want to sustain? The answer is no.
I sometimes just do the maths in my head about how many people live on this little country, and you start cutting out the number of people who are adults who are consuming alcohol, and then the number of those adults who are interested in drinking beer, and then you bring it down to the number of breweries that are in the country, and it's a terrifyingly low number, and we've been trying, I think, to push that over that 4% for so long. And I suppose the question is really then, what do you think needs to happen? Because you're all making great beers, so we've got that problem solved. What's the next thing? Is it marketing? Is it distribution? Is it how? And I hope that a podcast like this will start to change people's minds, because they'll see and hear the people behind the brews that they love. But we also want to have an opportunity to grow that, to get more people behind this movement, and to know the difference that it makes in the choices that they put in their glass. Any thoughts around that?
Yeah, look, I think one of the things, even after 25, 26 years, it's I think it's still a fledgling sector that needs nurturing and support. And it can be frustrating that some of the developments that happen, like the Alcohol Act and MUP, and there's some things coming out of the tracks in terms of labelling and deposit systems. And I think, because it's a small sector, our voice is not strong or loud, or so often maybe it's not heard in terms of some of the decisions that get made around some of these things. Like, I think MUP and the multi-buy, the ban on that, that had a disproportionate, the multi-buy had a disproportionate effect on craft breweries, because a lot of people like to mix and match.
Yeah, mix and match. Yeah.
And so, and was there so I think sometimes the inadvertent consequences of some of these things is maybe not recognised up front, but but as trying to kind of, I suppose, get heard or get our voice out there. It's often small when you're all busy doing your everyday work.
Of course.
And to try and participate in that debate is probably hard,
And I know you're heavily involved in promoting the education of around brewing and distilling as well, and your connection with the University in Carlow.
We are, I suppose. Look, like, you know, we try to support anything we think is going to be positive for the sector. We try to support it. I think we probably all do. But obviously, you know, we're small, we're busy, we're,
of course,
you know, trying to advance your business. But look, you know, having kind of skilled staff, you know, back in, you know, going back, you know, a number of years, there wasn't really any track for people to kind of formally get an education in brewing or distilling. So other than maybe doing a dairy degree and adopting or whatever.
Or a biotechnology degree. As Áine did.
And as I did back in the day.
These little microbes, the really interesting ones called yeast.
But look, no, but it's great to see, you know, kind of dedicated courses, you know, emerging. And I suppose we try to work with them a bit as well to try and give people practical experience. Because I think that's, the academic bit is great and people get their technical training, but getting out and having some kind of hands-on experience, either home brewing or, you know, actually getting a chance to work in the brewery on some of the placements. So we try to support that as well.
And on a practical level, just by the fact that obviously our alcohol drinking age is 18. So getting people to understand that this is a homegrown industry is, I think, really important.
Yeah.
I think a little bit of, you know, education goes a long way, though. I always find that even if you do a beer dinner or you bring in a tour of, you know, not foreign tourists, like local tourists, and you take them through the process and you give them a tasting, you have them hooked.
Yeah.
You know, you've given them something that they're like, oh, look, I've learnt a little bit. And then you find they go out and they're a brand ambassador for you. Like, but it is, like Seamus said, we're all busy. You know, brewing is a devotion, you know, that you have to love. But it's so important that we take that time to do it. And I think that will go a long way as well in changing maybe the culture of the, like, you know, the younger generations coming up, obviously the over 18 generation.
Well, I think there's a natural change coming with lifestyle. And, you know, I've been banding on for a good few years about savouring the moment, you know, drink less, drink better. I think that's certainly come to the fore. And you look at that new generation coming through who are, I think, more health conscious. I think they are ones, and MUP, this is where MUP possibly will help us, right? It just needs a settling time. And I hope I'm right in this because, as I said, it's certainly been a disruptor this year. You know?
Because when a minimum unit pricing was first suggested, there was a general fear that it or not a general fear, a general understanding that it wasn't going to have as big an impact on the craft beer sector because you're not working on these time, like you're working. Yeah. I suppose at the price points are different because you're using quality ingredients and you're doing smaller production, and it's a different type of alcohol. You know.
Well, what MUP did was it bridged the gap between a product that was 24 for 24 10 times a year or 24 for 20 versus our everyday pricing, which we need. You know. And it's not that craft beer is priced higher for more margin. It's because our process is so different. Yeah. We manually handle 25 kg bags in Rye River. We have a 2,500 litre tank or brew house. We brew, you know, 24/7, and that requires 14 brewers. I don't brew in 20,000 hectolitre batches like someone down on the Keys, right? and that's it in a nutshell, you know. Yeah. But what MUP has done, and I'm not labouring on it, is that it actually took people out of beer initially in the first few months. A, maybe there was a massive stockpiling going on, but B, it certainly sent shockwaves. And I think, again, the unintended consequence of a decision where I don't believe we were lobbied, we were engaged enough in the process. We lost, firstly, our match 3-4 and 4-4, which was a massive, I suppose, competitive advantage tool for us in the craft beer industry, that mix and match.
Because it would,
and part of the education as well, because it allowed
part
people
of it,
to
and trialing
sample different things, and you know, which was.
So we've just had one hit after another, and we're continuing. I think that's the resilience of the craft beer community in Ireland. You know, the fact that we have a newbie at 3 years. You know, it's brilliant to see the confidence. You know, within the sector, because we are playing in a small market share. There is a lot of us out there, and yet you have the confidence to get involved, you know, so it's brilliant.
The two brewings are so very different, and I don't think the general public realises just how different it is. And like, fortunately, I worked in Melbourne in a 4,000 hectolitre a year brew house. So it was a dual system brew house that did 1,100 hectolitres every hour, 45 minutes. Wow. It's a juggernaut. You make mother worts of high gravity that you fix at the end building before it goes out the door. It's fascinating in its own way. but it's not brewing like what we all do sitting around this table. And people don't understand those differences enough, I don't think either. You know, that when we start to brew in the morning, we're physically and mentally, you know, rewarded in that day for the work we're doing. You know, it's all very hands-on. It's a very different machine to what some of the other players in the market are doing. And that's where our prices have to come in differently. We're narrower margins, you know. That's where I think we have to get that education across, that yes, we both make alcoholic products, but in very, very different ways, with very, very different costings, and you know.
I feel like I feel kind of like it's moving in a direction that food has already gone.
Okay.
I think people now understand you can go and buy a sliced pan off the shelf for X amount, or you can go and support a local artisan baker, but you pay a premium for that.
Yeah.
And I think that's been fairly well documented in food. Food really took that kind of foodie approach early, and people wanted to support local and support high quality. Whereas it seems to be we're a couple of steps behind on that front in beer. But I do feel that people are finally getting on that bandwagon.
Yeah, I think so. I would hope so too.
Yeah. I think the fact that, I always think about the same comparison with food and how can they do it, but I think the fact that alcohol is such a regulated sector has been an impediment to that, because you have to go through licensed premises, for example.
Absolutely.
So I think at one end is the consumer, and I think there's an appetite for what we do, the same as there is for food, but we have to kind of navigate our way through kind of bottlenecks on the way.
There's definitely more barriers for the customer.
There's more barriers, so we can't rock up to a farmer's market on a Sunday morning and
have
educate people
beer
through seeing the choice, enjoying the taste, and what have you. You know,
it's very true.
So it's and you know, until recently we couldn't sell out of our own brewery. So you know, thankfully, even though it's not a straightforward piece of legislation, you know, there's some opportunity to do that now. But that chance to get in front of the consumer and you know, the education that comes out of that in terms of the difference in the products, because you have to actually, sometimes you can talk about it, but you really have to taste the difference. I say to people, you have to taste it, you know, whoever's craft beer product, but that's how you know what we're talking about.
I think this is why Liam's in Dead Centre, the model of having a brew pub is really interesting, because not even just for you, for the beers that you're producing, but I think for the sector in general. I think that's a really good move, to be able to get different beers into people's hands.
Yes.
Yeah, like we see all kinds of everybody. It's strange. It's definitely the demographic we expected to cross the door is not the demographic we get. You know, we get...
Are there not enough people with beards and tattoos for your liking, Liam?
Way too many. Not enough beards. Not enough beards. I know, but like we had always kind of said male orientated, probably 35 plus, you know, young professionals. But it's not. It's 18 to 80, and it's majority female.
Yeah.
But I think the difference is, yes, we have the brewery, but we also have award-winning food and just a lovely setting.
Lovely
so
setting.
A lot of people
it's gorgeous.
come there for that, and people are far more open to be educated that way, and it's easier to kind of get inside the mindset of what it is, what they drink, you know, because we don't carry many macro beers. Our first question to nearly everybody is, what would you normally drink? And then we can give them something that, because, and it's an example I always use, where you could have somebody who has been a Guinness drinker for 40 years and they say, I don't like that craft beer, my nephew gave me an IPA. But that's not like with like, and there has to be, as we mentioned before, there's a bridge, there's a beer for everybody, but it's about finding the bridge that's going to get them to where they want to be.
Amazing.
And, you know, so if we, you know, if somebody asks us for a macro stout, there'll be no problem.
Yep.
Yeah, that's settling. Try this. It's made 45 minutes up the road, and, you know, it's from wherever, Bagnallstown or Glasnevin or Selbridge. Or,
Such a great offering.
Yeah. So that way is great, but realistically, the size of the pool of people that we're talking to is tiny. So it's about widening that pool and educating more people, which is difficult.
Yeah, well, that's why it's important that, you know, it's great that you know, operators of pubs, you know, many are, you know, starting to offer a wider range of craft beers, and maybe some of the changing of the guard or the generation in on-trade in particular, you know, can be kind of helpful in that regard. But yeah, there's only so much, and like, you know, we've tried to do the same thing with Brewery Corner in Kenny and Urban Brewing, because we felt, you know, we have to lead the way a little bit. If we're going to say you can have a bar and you know, with craft and speciality beers, you kind of have to
and in urban
showed away
brewing,
as well.
the food aspect is so important to that. Like having incredibly high quality food that pairs incredibly well with your beers is just always a joy.
Yeah, well, look, great. Yeah, that's great to hear. Like a lot of hard work goes down by the team down there to do that. So it's nice to have the feedback. But look, that's what we're trying to achieve, I suppose, is show that there's you can enjoy a nice beer with nice food. It doesn't have to be wine. It doesn't have to and that there's a consumer for that and a market for that, and it's all it's a wide demographic, and hopefully more and more. People out there in the trade, because that's like we have to sell through the trade. Kind of recognise that.
And I suppose bringing that out as well, like just looking for different offerings and different styles of beer as well is interesting. I'm eyeing up Tom's very nice 750ml bottles here with the cork and cage on the top.
Yeah. This is So there's again, it's understanding your audience. We play in everyday craft. That's where 99% of our business is done. Be it in our crafty brewing range, in Crafter, Solus, or our core range, Rye River. But to your point, Liam, we bring people in at red ales maybe, and then they gravitate onto a pale ale, IPAs or stouts, and in Seamus's case here as well, our session IPAs. And you have to bring them on a journey, because you can't go from drinking mainstream lager into drinking a 750ml, barrel-aged 7 months Doppelbock. It doesn't happen, because what's the reaction going to be? Oh my God, shock. Whereas if you can bring people into the category and mature them through that category over a period of time. And I think patience is also required within what we're trying to do here. It's not going to happen overnight.
No.
We gave a stats on the States, but they're 25 years ahead of us.
Yeah.
He's probably more versed in this than I am. But he has seen the category grow from zero in Ireland when O'Hara's was probably the first. Were you the first, Seamus, to go?
Well, yeah, around the same, like Porterhouse and Fenwell.
Ollie and
really
yourself and a few, the forefathers of it, and now to be 3.4, but that's taken 25 years. So we all have to be patient and keep chipping away at it, and education, and along the way, what's really important for the sector is that quality and consistency, and everyone means to do it well, but unfortunately not everyone does it well. And I can be criticised for saying that at times, but that's the reality of it, because there's so many variables in brewing, and I'm not a brewer, but our job is to keep chipping away at it, and it'll come.
I'm only back in Ireland 8 years, so only 8 years back into the Irish scene. But I really do think that us as small brewers, craft brewers, local brewers, however you want to organise the section, we have learnt as well that we can't just introduce what we might want to drink ourselves as brewers that want something way out there like that. I think maybe at the beginning, there was an awful lot of, I've homebrewed this thing with like 150 IBUs. Would you like to drink it? I think we're also learning that we have to be a bit more approachable in how we brew our beers as well, for everyone to get them across the road, from the big houses, to say, come on over here. We've something easy to drink that's always going to taste the same. And I think I see a big evolving in the industry on our side as well, that we're learning that it, like you said, it is a journey, but we have to start with knowing that people are used to drinking, beer made for consumption rather than taste.
But beer is for drinking. Like at the end of the day. Sometimes I do a lot of beer tasting, and beer tasting is not as much fun, and beer judging is not as much fun as beer drinking.
I suppose like as Irish people as well, we drink in a certain way. Like a pint.
Yeah.
Whereas in Belgium, you're more an expert in that. There's a stronger beer, but it's consumed in a different way. There's a different culture about it. So like our bar culture, and I suppose, the way our beer culture, to the extent of how we drink beer, is at a certain place. And if something is way too strong or in terms of alcohol or flavour, it doesn't naturally fit in there on day one anyway. So it's like there is a kind of a step by step that people.
Well, this is what's interesting when you look at different demographics that are enjoying craft beer, and I'm thinking back to Liam's point about how women are walking in the door. Like imagine that, and they want to drink beer. Who'd have thought it? Isn't that? And I always think that really maybe it's some of that culture culture that we might need to combat, Seamus, that like, sure, we're all lads and we're out watching sports and we're drinking rounds of pints, and maybe creating slightly different moments or choices, or just seeing that you can do it a different way will open that up. Because if we want to grow this sector, we can't keep selling beer to the same people who are just drinking
but
it now.
that's where you're starting from.
Exactly. And that's why the work that you're doing with like the beer and food matching and urban brewing and bringing things back to the on-trade experience too is, and we can do
really
smaller important.
We can do smaller serves and what have you.
Absolutely.
But to get that out into, you look at, and for retail and for off trade, people you can do that when they have a beer at home. But when you get into the on trade and trying to adopt to the way it currently is, and somehow advance this industry or this sector, the craft sector, into the on trade, there's a lot of I suppose set ways of doing things, which you're not going to change overnight.
No, you're not. You're not. But little by little, hopefully. Yeah. Hopefully.
And I think we around the table are maybe the last generation of that culture, that the change has started. I find a lot of the younger people that I'd be engaging with, they've already looked into your business. Yeah. They know about you. They know about your business.
Googled you.
Yeah, you've been Googled. But, they're interested in how you do your work, not just what you're putting in front of them in a glass as well, which really helps us as a sector, So.
And I suppose looking then at the future or the developments, and we've been talking through the journeys that you've all been through, but like next steps, or like I know, like in a time like this, how would we ever know? But do you have any kind of thoughts about, where things might be going or what might be of interest to new craft drinkers? Yeah.
Well, being the newbie at the table, we are noticing a change in the publican's culture. We're still out knocking on doors going, hi, we're new. But there's a lot more positive reaction.
Super.
That, yes, we will try your beer. It's new, it's an interesting story, and it's local, and there's not many breweries very west at the moment.
Yes.
We hope that'll change. But so that's really positive. It's a slow turning ship, but at least they're willing to try. And that's what we're finding around Connemara and Galway, because that's what we're focusing on at the moment. But, if we could see that happening in the pubs, it's really positive. It is positive. It gives you hope. It's why you want to keep going,
It's like publicans are small business owners as well. So they're looking at what sets them apart from other places as well,
And I think what's also acting as a catalyst is the nature of the Irish pub scene.
Okay.
So we're not the same pub scene we were 10 years ago. You go to Athlone, great tourist town. Liam is right in the middle, down by the Shannon.
Gorgeous.
I don't know what demographic of the 18 to 80-year-olds are tourists, but I'm assuming, with the dollar the way it is at the moment, urban brewing the same. You go to the west, Wild Atlantic Way. That habitual, I'm out 5 nights a week at the pub drinking 6 pints of, mainstream brands. That's no longer the case. So point of differentiation is craft. Yeah. Telling the local story, telling, and the consumer that's coming in is expecting something different. Yes, they all want, a pint of Guinness, right? Why wouldn't they? But they don't all want a pint of Heineken or Carlsberg or any of the other mainstream brands that have such a market share dominance for years. And I think that is our opportunity. It's probably, I would say, less challenging as you get out of the urban centres because of, everyone wants to sell as much beer as possible, and where you do that is in urban centres. So I'm not saying it's easy to get a tap anywhere, but it's probably a little easier the further out you go from the major cities, But that's the opportunity. So that's how you do it. But it's patience, and it's and then the education that has to go with it, because a tap on a counter, is not going to sell beer for you. It's the digital, and Liam is a great man behind the scenes on digital, but it's how you tell your story with limited budgets, because we can't all do billboards and bus shelters and it's
but
getting
we are doing a podcast.
We are doing a podcast, yes.
And budget is a great point. Like, we had a conversation on the walk here. Yeah. If we could give what other people are given, it would be a very different landscape. We can't afford to do what big breweries are doing, and it really sets us at a disadvantage. I would say an unfair disadvantage, but again, if you decide to play rain in the football and then complain about getting wet.
Correct.
Play football in the rain rather, and then complain about getting wet. We knew what we were getting into, and we knew these guys were we knew how they played their cards. but when you see it firsthand, it can be torturous.
I look at, and I think you get very tenacious in the industry because every euro has to work. So much harder than a euro in maybe other industries or big beer. And we did a full brand transition this year on what would be seen as not even shoestring, you know, in comparison to any mainstream. I mean, you know, we did, in essence, what Snickers did to Martin or Opal Fruits did to Starburst. You know, we did from McGardi's to River. And we did that on a budget of, we had €30,000 to tell that story. So, like, I have no problem sharing that. That's the nature of the craft brewing industry. And has it worked? It's working. Yeah, we're seeing it. The consumer is moving. But the best use of that resource is podcasts like this. You know, it is targeted digital media campaigns, but it has to be digital media. Even print press has gone too expensive for the likes of
it doesn't have the
industry.
reach either.
And it doesn't have the reach because that consumer we've just spent 20 minutes talking about that are now hopefully the new future for craft brewing, they're not reading digital and they're not looking at the TV.
But they hopefully are listening to this podcast on their way to work in the morning. And on that positive note, I think we'll wrap up, which seems like a great time. Just a huge thank you to Áine, to Seamus, to Liam and to Tom for joining us on this episode of our first brand new podcast here. I'm looking forward to continuing the conversation with other brewers and craft breweries, but thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.